The Science and Spirit of Success, How to Master Every Area of Your Life. My name is Chris Desi. I am here and presenting to you today as the Quantum Coach, but I'm also somebody that's lived two very different lives. That first life was built on intellect, ambition, for lack of a better word, grinding, my own ego, identity, and external success. And the other, the one that I'm living now and fulfilling, is built on intuition, alignment, coherence, and inner truth. And that's what this presentation is about. It's the convergence of those two worlds, which is why we're combining the science and the spirit of success. For 27 years, I've been an executive in media. I've built agencies. I've helped scale companies. I've delivered lots of presentations and keynotes and millions in revenue. I've built AI-driven marketing systems. I've produced global events. And I've appeared on television a bunch as a talking head. But behind the scenes, I was suffering, right? So I was achieving, I was exhausted, I was winning, but I was misaligned. I was recognized publicly, but disconnected. And then last summer, I had a bit of a cliched moment on the beach in Kiwa Island where I had a bit of a meltdown. And it reminded me of this Bhagavad Gita saying that tells us we're born into the world of nature, and our second birth is into the world of spirit. And I believe that I did move through into my second birth. And I guess while I was on the beach in Kiwa this past summer, I really did genuinely feel my world shift, which I refer to as the quantum shift and my second birth. What happened was I was on vacation with my family and I was watching a deposition of a lawsuit that I'm involved in, where somebody that I trusted completely tore apart my reputation. So I spent about 3.5 hours watching this person lying about my character, who I am as a human being. I closed my laptop. I walked out onto the beach, and it sounds ridiculous, but I looked at the ocean and I said, God, source, universe, please let me be your vessel. There's got to be more than this. I just felt like I wasn't really fulfilling my true dharma. And in that moment, something inside of me broke. And then something inside of me woke up. Just like the Bhagavad Gita says, we're born into the world of nature and our second birth is into the world of spirit. And something that I hadn't experienced before, but I do believe that this is my second birth. And when that happened, my relationships in my life changed, my business changed, my purpose changed. It reminded me of this, Rumi saying, this is actually from, the book is from a Wayne Dyer book where he quotes Rumi. And he says, destroy the house to find the treasure. The spiritual path wrecks the body and afterward restores it to health. So it destroys the earth, house to unearth the treasure. And without being overly dramatic, I felt my house had been destroyed. From where I sit, that treasure was waiting to be discovered from underneath. And it reminded me of Plato's allegory of the cave, where I felt like the prisoner in Plato's cave. If you're familiar with the allegory of the cave, prisoners are looking at shadows against the wall and they view that as their reality. And I think I had spent decades staring at those shadows, titles, roles, recognition, applause, metrics, achievement, but none of it was reality. Personally, I think I was confusing the shadows for substance. And I think most executives live there. Probably it's the reason why you're on this call right now is because you're probably feeling like you're living there, where you're chained to perception, performance, and pressure. And that day on the beach, just like Plato's allegory of the cave, I believe I stepped out of the cave and into something very different. And it reminded me of this. This was me in the cave. I Googled my name and saw this ridiculousness that looks like success. This was really the cave. I was running an agency. I was producing events. And while everything looked incredible on the outside, from all the appearances and the panels in the press, being that guy that felt like success, but inside I was exhausted and out of integrity. And that wasn't failure, it was a message. The shadows were never the real thing. And I think we'll get more into what I believe the word integrity means, but it made me think about how I don't believe that there's one brain. We have three brains, our intellect, our heart, and our gut. And science now shows this, that we don't have just one brain, that we have those three. The head brain is logic and strategy and intellect. The heart brain is coherence, intuition, and emotional intelligence. And the gut brain is instinct because of our microbiome, our courage, and our creativity. Here's the mind-blowing part. I actually interviewed a doctor who told me that it is fact that there are actually more neural signals traveling from the heart to the brain than from the brain to the heart. And to me, what that means is that our deepest intelligence isn't in our head, it's in our alignment. It reminded me of this, where there's an author, Thomas Campbell, who wrote a book called My Big Theory of Everything, My Big Toe. And he's a physicist, and he believes that he's proven that we actually live in a simulation of sorts. And he talks about how in our lives, and perhaps in your life, we are all about studying and building up the intellectual side of our lives, but we are not taught to trust and build up the intuitive side of our lives. And once we do that, some incredible things can crack open. And for me, in the past year, I've been able to launch Torque AI. We've had 92% year-over-year growth. When we built Torque AI systems for our clients, those wins didn't come from grinding harder. It came from stopping to force outcomes and starting to work from alignment, coherence, and clarity. And those big breakthroughs came from not overthinking, but getting into the right state of being. And I was able to launch the Global Quantum Shift, Torque AI, Memento, as well as our AI Summit, NYC. And we could talk about that later. This is not a business call. This is me sharing my experiences so that we can get to helping you all. So what it tells me is that we're moving from force to flow. And there was a book that I had started reading called Power versus Force. Actually, I have it right here. That started me on this journey that I was reading when I was in Kiwa. This is the book. I highly recommend it. And part of it is about less brain work and greater consciousness so that you can achieve higher performance states. And when we're in those higher performance states, we don't think more. We think less, as a matter of fact. Think about it, but in flow, when an athlete is in flow. But it got me thinking about this parable. And the parable is a story about a Buddhist monk. And monk meditates in the temple and gets frustrated. There's too much noise. There's like a cacophony of noise when he's trying to meditate. And based on his frustration, he's kind of like, don't these people realize that I'm trying to meditate and have peace? So then he picks himself up and he goes to a lake. And he sits by the lake and he meditates and he starts to enjoy it and does that for a couple of weeks. But then there are birds and there's animals and they're making noise and he gets frustrated again. And he notices that there's a boat on the side of the lake. So he says, Eureka. He jumps on the boat, goes out to the middle of the lake, and he starts to meditate in the middle of the lake. And he finds some peace there for a few weeks. And while he's meditating one day in the middle of the lake, he sees a boat coming toward him. And he starts yelling at the boat, getting furious. Stop your boat. Stop moving. And the boat smashes into his boat. And he looks at the boat and he realizes that the boat is in fact empty. That there was no one to blame. Nobody had intent to hurt him. It was just an empty boat drifting on the water. And the message that I extract is that it's never the boat. It's the meaning that we attach to the boat. That pain is inevitable, but our suffering, our mental anguish is optional. And that's really when I was thinking about the deposition and what I was watching and how that was my sort of empty boat. That betrayal that I felt wasn't about me. It was a mirror showing me where I still was attached to that ego and that identity and that safety and that recognition. And when I stopped making all of that personal and in a personal affront, I stepped into my true power. And it reminded me of another parable where there are three people walking past the same parrot. Imagine a parrot squawking. And the first person goes, oh my gosh, that's so annoying. Second person walks by and goes, well, that's so beautiful, a parrot singing. And then another person starts to have a conversation with the parrot. Oh, hello, Mr. Parrot. That's really interesting. Hi, parrot. How are you? Oh, isn't that a funny little parrot? And my takeaway from that is it's the same parrot. That parrot didn't change one bit. And for me, it means that we're all living in our own little world. And we're not living in the world. We're living in our world, meaning our perception is in fact reality for us as an individual. And that got me thinking about Jill Bolte Taylor. And if you don't know about Jill Bolte Taylor, she wrote this book called My Stroke of Insight. This is her pictured here giving her TED Talk. And Jill actually proves scientifically what we're discussing when thinking falls away. So she's a Harvard neuroscientist, and she actually had a stroke. And she realized that she was having that stroke. It shut down her left brain, and her thinking mind went offline. And she felt unity and peace and oneness and, frankly, euphoria, which she describes in her TED Talk, which I do highly recommend. She felt no separation, no stress. And she said that she was no longer the choreographer of her life, that sort of thinking monkey brain. And this is the science of consciousness, that the events don't create suffering, that our thinking mind does. And I found that really powerful. And I think when you can get into that flow state and remove that thinking, incredible things can happen. And in 2 years, generating $32 million in sales, that happened not from stress. That was born from presence and from clarity and from mission and from being able to be in a powerful state instead of a primal state, because the thinking creates the stress and presence creates results. So then realize that I have the option. You could be in that primal state, or you can be in a powerful state. And it reminds me of the Tao Te Ching, where it says, in every pursuit of knowledge, everyone says that something is added. In the practice of the way, everyone says that something is dropped, meaning you're peeling away what you were taught. You're peeling away the old way of interacting with the world so that you can get to your true self, that self that is always there. And you can realize that there are those two states. There's powerful, and then there's primal. And it's simple, but it could be life-changing and scientific, that at any moment you are in one of those two states. You are either in a powerful state of, and if you think about it, it just makes sense, right? Joy or curiosity, calm, or feeling hope or creativity, or like a genuine, real connection or passion or presence when you're in the moment with somebody. And, or you could be in that primal state of fear and scarcity and frustration, like gimme, 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 and anxiety and even anger. And I know I felt this as a overwhelm or even imposter syndrome. But the thing is, you can't be both. You're always in one. You're never in two. And biology proves this. The primal state is the sympathetic nervous system. It's that fight or flight or freeze. And a powerful state is the parasympathetic, that is resting and restoring and connecting. So for me, here's the key, is that the event doesn't determine your state. It's the meaning that you give to the event that does. And it could be, as in the business world, it's the same email or the same sales call or the same launch, but you can map a different meaning to it when you're in a different state. And if you think back, when you're in that powerful state, you have access to creativity, to clarity, to intuition, to charisma. And when you're in a primal state, you have access to nothing. So entrepreneurs ask me, what's the number one thing that I can do to grow my business? And I say this: moment by moment, notice your state and make a valiant attempt to shift back into a powerful state before taking action, because powerful state action compounds, right? And the primal state action completely collapses and will collapse you, frankly. So how we execute this is paramount. And this is something that not a lot of people talk about, but I believe this, that your belief and your thought triggers your emotion, triggers your action, and then generates results. And that's the loop. So let's break that down. This is the engine underneath all of it, right? So your beliefs create your thoughts. Your thoughts create your emotions. You can work yourself up. And then those emotions drive your actions, like how you interact with people, how you talk to your team. And your actions create the results, and the results reinforce your beliefs, right? So it's this viral loop. And you can't get an apple from an orange tree, right? You can't get abundance from a scarcity belief, and you can't get success from self-doubt as your identity. And the linchpin of all of it is belief. So then the question becomes, if my beliefs indicate my destiny, how do I personally change my beliefs? And that's seeing the lie as a lie. So the fastest transformation is that self-doubt, that imposter syndrome. I was working with a young entrepreneur, 29 years old, brilliant, successful, devout, called me from Miami and said, hey man, I was out last night with some major players and I had massive anxiety. I couldn't get out of it. And I was like, what? Like, that's seemed bizarre to me. I mean, this young person was brilliant. I said, well, what were you thinking before the anxiety hit? And he paused and he thought about it a little bit. And he's like, I was thinking, man, I don't belong here. And that single thought threw him into a primal state. So I asked him something grounded in our discussions. And I said, do you believe in source? Do you believe that you can tap into source energy? He said, yes. And I said, then how could that source energy put you in a place that you don't belong? And he was like, oh my God, I belong everywhere I am. That's our gift. Instant reorientation of identity, instant access back into a powerful state. When you see the belief is untrue, completely dissolves. And you can't unsee that, right? That's the fastest, deepest transformation I know, other than integrity. Integrity, I believe, is the cure for unhappiness. And Martha Beck, the author of The Integrity is the Way, it's not about morality, right? Like, it's about structural alignment. The saying is, tension is who you think you should be, but reality is who you are. So when you're out of that integrity and you're not in that place of being truthful to not just yourself, but the people around you, you suffer always. And when you're in integrity, life moves through you without resistance. So it's when you're not doing that, and you're lying to yourself, there's that misalignment. It's like saying no to misaligned roles. I turned down a major corporate role that looked great on LinkedIn, but it's going to sound woo-woo. It felt wrong in my body. And I think earlier in life, the pre-meltdown, I probably would have taken that for recognition and the title. And today I walk away from that. And I used to lean into that. And every time I did, something would go wrong. Integrity and truth creates expansion. Let's do an exercise, right? So I like the idea of something that my friend wrote a book called, there's the Buddhist saying, tension is who you think you are. Well, we'll start here. Here's an exercise. From 1 to 10, how happy am I with my life? 10 being the most happy. Ask yourself this question while we're sitting here. What will make it a 10? Do that. Pretty simple, right? A little bit too simple, but you understand. And when you start thinking about your life and you start thinking about the things that you hang on to, you start to realize that we all bear these treasured wounds, meaning we all tell ourselves that story of I don't belong here and misalignment. And it's time to stop that. So let's talk about remembering and how we are either the dream or we are living the dream, right? So how do I get to my dream future? My friend Dan Sumber wrote a book with a gentleman by the name of Joe Vitale from The Secret. Some of you may remember this guy. And they wrote the book called The Remembering Process. And the remembering process was born from Dan as a music producer working with Joe Vitale on a song. And when he was talking to Joe about how to create the song and what the lyrics would be, he challenged Joe and he said, well, don't think about what lyrics to write. I want you to project yourself into the future and I want you to remember how you got there. So that's where this exercise becomes really powerful, where if you can sit back and think about what would I remember about the person in the future, the me of the future, what would I remember about how I got there? So the exercise is as follows. You imagine your future self, maybe it's 5 years in the future, and you allow them to tell you your path to getting you there. And you allow them to guide you back into alignment. And further, look in the exercise, and I'll just read it from the book, The Remembering Process, is that when you're ready, after you've asked your future self to tell you how you got there, it's a little mind-bending, but it will free you from being obsessed over the details, the tactical details of getting you there. You ask your future self to get up and leave the room. Kind of crazy, right? And you imagine that your past self from 5 years ago walks in and sits down. So now all of a sudden you have a paradigm shift. You become your future self. And when you're that person's future self, you need to take a moment to recall what your past self has been going through. What was your life exactly like 5 years ago? Imagine your past self asking you questions about how your life turned out, and see yourself answering with empathy, with understanding, and with reassurance. And tell your past self about some of the challenges that will be coming up in the years ahead, challenges that you've already faced. And when you're finished connecting with your past self, imagine that your future self re-enters the room, and now all three of you are hanging out. And you stand up, and your bodies begin to glow and become translucent. You float toward each other and merge into a single being of light. And when this happens, you might experience the intense release of emotion. Three of you are now integrated as a whole, a single being who exists out of time. This being is the real you. I even encourage you to try this meditation at least once, even if you've never meditated it before, and it'll help you recognize that there's a timeless nature to your existence, that you're more than just a physical being moving forward through time. In the presence of this awareness, your momentary worries will shrink, replaced by feelings of expansiveness and connectedness. And this was extracted from Personal Development for Smart People by Steve Pavlina and reprinted in The Remembering Process with Permission. And I love that meditation and that work because it just sort of extracts that thinking monkey brain out of the equation, which I think is probably one of the more powerful things that you could potentially do. And then part of that is, and homework that you guys can take from this is to draft a letter of congratulations to your future self. Dan put that in the remembering process. And to my amazement, when I interviewed him on the Quantum Shift podcast, was that in one of his letters, he congratulated himself for the Grammy that he won. And 10 years later, wait for it, he was a Grammy nominee. So when you remove that thinking monkey brain out of the equation, some magical things can happen. On the Quantum Shift podcast, I also interviewed Dr. Howard Eisenberg, who actually proved telepathy in the 70s in a lab. Watch that episode. It's pretty incredible. But there are two things that he talks about that I think are really important. The first thing is the only way out is in, and I'll get into more details on that in a minute. The other part is the upper limit problem. And he talks about how we as human beings, we put the brakes on our positive energy, our success and love. That when I was talking to him, I said, well, how do we break out of that? And he said, you need to stretch your mind, shift your reality. And for me, a light bulb went off and I immediately thought of my friend's book, because I said, that's what is happening there. When you're remembering and you're asking your future self, what are the steps that I took to get there? You're creating your future. You are now the author, the co-author of that. And you are stretching your mind and quieting that monkey brain portion of yourself. So when the doctor talks about the only way out being in, and making sure that you're doing that and confronting that, he talked about how the inner work creates outer results always, and also addressed the fact that in his book, he talks about something really fascinating that kind of bent my mind, and it's this, where it says science needs imagination. And what I mean by that is somehow along the way, our scientific community and the rational thinkers in our world lost sight of the magic of our world and the magic of imagination and the magic of stretching our minds and seeing different possibilities. And he points out something so obvious and something so, I believe, profound, and that is that science needs imagination. Einstein's theory of relativity. Einstein did not follow the scientific method to get to his theory. He went for walks. He played music. He daydreamed, and he imagined, and he stretched his mind. And that's what these exercises are meant to do. The remembering process with three versions of yourself: the future version, the present version, the past version, and the present version becomes the future version. And then you bring them all together. You're stretching your mind. And when you do that and everything relaxes and you can be creative, That's when you allow space for new ideas to come in, new ways of working around problems to come in and solving those problems in a constructive way instead of anxiety and angst and things like that. Illusion, am I ready to release? Maybe the illusion is that you're not good enough, right? Maybe it's that imposter syndrome. And what truth am I ready to embody? Like my client, you belong everywhere. That's your right as a human. It never went anywhere, right? Everybody has a right to love and a right to be in the room. And what aligned action will I take in the next 24 hours to get me there? And that aligned action might be maybe you read one of these books, maybe you meditate. I will say that by virtue of you being on this call, in my mind, you've already taken one of those. So now earlier I mentioned find the thing, do the thing well. The wrinkle that blew my mind in this book called The Courage to be Disliked, which I highly recommend. What is my dharma? And I realized that really confronting it, it was all anchored in wanting to be recognized to do something. And once I got past that, I was able to do the courageous thing, like turn down the big title job and walk away from the thing that I knew that would give me the most trouble, but I'd only be answering to my ego. So I hope you can challenge yourself. And once you go through these exercises and say, what is the thing that will allow me to live in integrity, being just truthful to yourself and truthful to the people around you, and figuring out what your dharma and your purpose on this planet is? What's the one thing that only you can do? That the final line is do the thing, deny the desire for recognition. And I don't know about you guys, but adding that one thing, I was embarrassed because I was like, oh my goodness, everything I've done in my career was anchored in a desire for recognition. But it also just makes sense that it will collapse everything into reality. That is real manifestation. That is neuroscience. That is spirituality. That is real leadership, right? That when you're challenging yourself to do those things, that you will become a better leader. When you challenge yourself, you will become more present. Your team will respect you and love you even more. Here's another exercise that we could do. And this was in the Integrity book. I want you to think about, and do this with me, put your hands out and think about the thing that you shouldn't do. And it doesn't have to be a lion. In my mind, I envisioned it as a lion. It's gnarling and growling, really upset. And the thing you shouldn't do, I don't know, Google yourself or, brag about yourself or whatever that might be. And it's really angry and it's growling and crying and roar and wants to do that thing so badly. It wants to do the easy thing. And then imagine your best self in the other hand. And this self is the one that does the right thing all the time. This is the one that is yelling at the bad thing all the time and trying to control the bad thing. And the bad thing is yelling at the right thing. And it's saying, let me do the bad thing. And there's all sorts of arguing going on between the two. And there's so much energy involved, right? The good one is expending so much energy to try and quiet the bad one. The bad one is saying, oh, just let me do the bad thing, please. If you pause for a minute, pull back and you look at them, the part of you that is always trying to do the right thing and the part of you that really wants to do the bad thing. And you observe the energy that they're both expending while they're arguing with each other. And you realize that the observer of those two things, that's you, that is the real you, that is the essence of who you are, the observer. Not the good thing, not the bad thing, not the tension and the anger between. And in that book, Martha Beck says something really profound and kind of knocked me off my seat. And it was, welcome home. Man, I think that's powerful. I love this. The outer work can never be small if the inner work is great. And the outer work can never be great if the inner work is small. And I think we all kind of know that intrinsically, which brings me to another parable. So the frame in the photograph. Life is the photograph. Success, money, titles, those are just the frame, right? So the real life, the thing in the middle is real. And the lesson is stop decorating the frame. See the picture. Have the courage to have the clarity to look and see the actual picture. So I'm going to end with this about my father was ill and I was visiting him. And As I'm leaving, he says, Chris. I said, yeah, Dad. And he looks at me and says, keep up the good work. It was odd, a little bit out of context. I was leaving instead of saying goodbye. Stops me to say, keep up the good work. Like, thanks, Dad. Love you. And I left and I went home. And that ended up being the last words that my father spoke to me because he passed away. And I've used that as an anchor in my life and in my world and as a reminder to not just be gentle with myself and encourage myself, but to encourage the people around me to keep up the good work and to really not work harder, not try to be more and not do more, but keep up the good work at being you. Because you're further on than you realize. You're not behind. You're not broken. You're not alone. We are all one consciousness experiencing itself just through different eyes. So I'll end on this. No sales pitch, but I will offer you a free coaching session. It's an hour long. It's a real coaching session. Today I shared some tools, some stories, some frameworks, parables, and a little bit of science, but transformation doesn't just happen from inspiration, right? Just from watching this. Transformation, I believe, happens from integration, and integration happens best when someone walks the path with you. So that's why I believe my dharma is coaching people like you, not because anybody needs any fixing, but because I think you're ready for expansion just by virtue of being on this call. So that first session, completely free on me. You can email me, chris@torqueapp.ai, or find me on the website. I don't have a link to the calendar right now that I can share with you guys, but I'll put it in the description of the video when I post this on YouTube. The podcast is The Quantum Shift with Chris Desi. This will be a real session, right? So it's not a sales call. I'll give you a full-on quantum shift coaching session and we'll figure it out. We'll diagnose one area of your business or your life, your marketing, your positioning, your leadership, your offer, your time. We'll identify limiting beliefs, limiting states that are driving you in the wrong direction, and we'll identify the ones that will help you drive results. And then we'll map out one clear, aligned next step, so that when you leave the coaching session, you'll leave with clarity and momentum. And a large part of me giving that away is because I believe a lot of us have spent decades and decades wiring our nervous system for certain beliefs, identities, states, and behaviors. And shifting those patterns alone is possible, but shifting them together with a coach, it's faster, it can be deeper, and it can be much more permanent. So if you've ever felt yourself in a primal state, stress, anxiety, overthinking, fear, right? We all have. This is your invitation back to that powerful state, that spot where you're confident that you know you belong, so that we can go in together and that outer world can finally match who you really are. That's it, gang. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your courage being here. Thank you for your presence. As my father said to me, I'll say to you, keep up the good work and have a great weekend.